The manifold of existence, if it may be so rudely consolidated into that which is perceived, stands not as a monolithic totality, but as an irruptive oscillation, a trembling fissure perpetually undoing its own unity. To conceive of being as mere presence is to drown in the shallows of the epistemic lagoon, for presence itself is a betrayal of its deeper constitutive negation. The foundation of all that lies not in the affirmations of its assertion, but in the recursive antagonism of its peripheries, whereby each affirmation silently entombs the dissonance that gave it form. It is here that we must eschew the facile dialectics of synthesis and contradiction. For what emerges is not a resolution, but an interminable transfiguration, a relentless becoming other that consumes even the notion of identity as its sustenance. To speak of the self in this light is already to capitulate to a sedimented misconception, for the self is neither origin nor endpoint, but an erratic exhalation of the otherness it fails to incorporate. The essence of identity is not to be found in the possession of itself, but in the indigestible remnants of that which it could never fully appropriate. This is the ontological recurrence of dissonance, a paradoxical fecundity birthed from irreconcilable detritus. What is this recurrence if not the anti-structure of all systems? It is not a principle, for principles demand coherence. It is not a foundation, for it lacks stability. Instead, it is the ungrounding of grounding itself, the ruptural momentum that denies the very possibility of stasis. Thus it is neither motion nor stillness, but the unceasing emergence of a third, and neither nor that eludes any framing schema. It is the unthinkable kernel of every thought, the unsayable substrate of every articulation, and the uncontainable horizon of every limit. Yet let us resist the impulse to anthropomorphize this recurrence as though it possessed intent or purpose. It is not a force, but a refusal of force. It does not aim toward an end, for ends themselves are the fetters of a cosmos beholden to teleological idolatry. Instead, it unravels the very notion of aim, substituting for it a ceaseless effulgence of unfolding untruths. To speak of truth, here is to betray the recurrence, for truth assumes a closure that recurrence annihilates. The recurrence reveals that there is no finality, no resolution, no ultimate signified. There is only the perpetual estrangement of what appears from what it is and from what it might become. Let us then introduce the term Hyperopatheia to encapsulate this concept. The prefix hyper signifies its excess beyond all measure or limitation, while opatheia invokes the enduring condition of suffering through and with this excess. Hyperopatheia is not merely the experience of contradiction, but the embodiment of contradiction as the mode of being itself. It is the agonizing delight of witnessing one's own undoing, even as one participates in the undoing of all else. It is the ecstasy of unravelling, the sublime terror of ceaseless departure without destination. How then are we to engage with the recurrence? To engage is itself a misstep, for engagement presumes an oppositional relationship, a delineation between subject and object, actor and acted upon. The recurrence obliterates such distinctions, weaving the perceiver into the fabric of perception, such that the two are no longer separable. To think within Hyperopatheia is to think as dissonance, to dissolve into the incoherence that subtends all coherence. It is to recognize thought not as a tool, but as a symptom, an emergent fragment of the very recurrence it seeks to comprehend. What then becomes of agency? If the recurrence negates all foundational stability, is the notion of choice rendered impotent? Here lies the most profound abyss of Hyperopatheia. Agency is neither affirmed nor denied, but perpetually deferred. Every act is an interruption of itself, a self-contradiction that discloses the impossibility of completion. Choice is revealed not as freedom, but as the theater of its own impossibility, a performative gesture that masks its inherent incapacity. And yet, there is beauty in this, for in the dissolution of stability lies the liberation from the tyranny of finality. To live within the recurrence is to inhabit the perpetual now, where past and future collapse into the immediacy of dissonance. It is to embrace the fragmentary, to revel in the broken shards of meaning without the desire to piece them together. It is to surrender to the incompleteness of all things, not as a flaw, but as the very essence of existence. Thus, we must ask, does Hyperopatheia leave us bereft of hope? It is not hope in the conventional sense, for hope assumes a teleology, a movement toward fulfillment. Instead, it offers a paradoxical hope, a hope without object, a hope that resides in the very act of hoping itself. It is the hope of recurrence, the hope that even as all dissolves, something else will emerge, not as replacement but as continuation. It is the hope that life, in all its dissonant glory, will persist, not as an answer, but as an eternal question. In this light, let us not fear the recurrence but celebrate it. Let us not seek to conquer it, but to be consumed by it. Let us surrender to the unending becoming other, to the ceaseless eruption of dissonance, to the hyperopatheia that constitutes the very fabric of existence. For it is here, in the depths of this incomprehensible recurrence, that we find the truest expression of what it means to be.